So this is kind of switching gears to what everyone was talking about today. Our work in the Green Infrastructure Program is primarily about stormwater management. So I'll just talk a little bit about what we've been doing and the new opportunities that we're hoping will arise going forward. So as was mentioned before, DEP provides all the water services for all of New York City, and our program has largely been focused on the combined, on the combined sewer areas of the city, which is about 60% of New York City, and our primary focus up to date was in the outer boroughs, just because of the land opportunities, and there's really very little space in Manhattan where we can construct some of the practices that we want to manage stormwater. And here are some examples of the types of green infrastructure that we've been implementing. So our focus is to do nature-based solutions in a distributed manner. So while the last presentation was about the wastewater treatment facilities, we're trying to reduce the load on the sewers by implementing these nature-based solutions on a regional scale. So the top are some images of typical practices that we've been implementing in the streets and the sidewalks. And the bottom two are examples where we've either worked with our public property owners or some private property owners to implement some type of practice that works for their use of the space, or we work with them to figure out how they can meet their stormwater requirement rules. So here's a breakdown of the typical, of actually how we've been doing so far. This is from our 2019 report. So you can see that primarily we've been focused on the public right-of-way because our agency can implement directly onto those properties, but we are anticipating that the private property implementation will be a key part for our program to meet our water quality goals. So yeah, you can see that it's very, very skewed towards right-of-way currently, but we really need the private sector to implement the stormwater management practices in order for our agency to be able to meet our mandate. And here's some examples of how we refer to the green infrastructure solutions. So what we've been implementing are right-of-way, which are vegetated practices. We also have been looking at permeable pavement. We have some things called infiltration basins, which are not vegetated. So there are subsurface practices that capture stormwater beneath the surface. And we're also doing detention systems, green roofs. So, you know, all the usual stormwater management technologies. And in terms of the public property partners, we've worked with the Parks Department, we work with schools, housing. We're also working with the fire department and the police department to retrofit some of their buildings with, usually it's green roofs. But we're also trying to expand our portfolio to larger projects and new innovative projects, such as the Tibbetts Brook Daylighting Project. We're also trying to figure out how to incorporate stormwater reuse as a way to mitigate the stormwater runoff and the stormwater that enters our sewers. We're also trying to combine some of our efforts with flood mitigation programs. So what I think in the Netherlands is also called cloudbursts. We're trying to implement those types of practices. And lastly, we also want to do larger projects in the roadways through these median projects, where we're redirecting flow from multiple streets into one area within the street. And lastly, so here's the private property, our program. And like I said, this is a really key part for us to be able to meet our stormwater requirements. Up to now, we've had a grant program that has been basically paying back a private property owner who implements some type of stormwater management practice within their property. That's now a green roof incentive program. So if you implement a green roof, we'll pay for that as a we'll pay for that on a square foot basis. We're also starting a new program called the Private Incentive Program, where we're working with a third-party administrator, and they're going to be targeting large property owners to implement some type of green infrastructure practice within their property. So we're not directly designing or constructing the green infrastructure for that. The third-party administrator will be handling all of that. Some other work that we're doing is, as was mentioned before, I think Suzanne mentioned, we're working with the solar and the green roof initiative through the local law 9294. And lastly, the stormwater regulations, which I mentioned before. So far we have the MS4 and the 2012 stormwater rule. These are separate rules depending on whether you're in the combined area or the separate area. And these get triggered whenever there's new development or redevelopment on a certain threshold of land. But we're actually trying to change that requirement into a unified stormwater rule for for all of New York City. So what we're trying to do is incentivize only retention projects, whereas up to now, most private property projects have been detention based. So it goes into a tank and then it's slowly released into the sewer. So we're trying to focus on retention only projects. And if they need to do detention because of certain types of space constraints or other, land usage or something what's wrong with the soil, then it's a very strict slow release requirement. So we understand that, New York City is extremely constrained and the opportunities for any new building or any existing building to be able to capture and basically infiltrate the water into their property is extremely difficult. And we're hoping that there'll be some innovative technologies, including reuse projects or filtration projects, that will help the private property owners meet the new requirements that we're proposing through this rule amendment. Another big part of our program is maintenance. So because we have so many types of green infrastructure practices throughout the city, it's an ongoing financial requirement for us to be able to maintain, and not just our agency, any agency who has these projects, they have a continuous need to be able to maintain these properties. So we're always looking for new ways to reduce the maintenance requirements. Jennifer mentioned biochar. That's something I think a lot of other cities are looking at as a way to improve the plant health and reduce the plant maintenance requirements. And the same is going to apply for all the private property owners who are going to be implementing these types of stormwater practices on their property as part of their regulation. And here's some other work that our group is doing. These aren't directly related to the green infrastructure program, but it ties directly into the water quality goals that we're trying to meet. So there's wetland restoration projects. We're doing water quality pilots through oyster and mussel activity. We're also, like I said, we're trying to tie some of our efforts with the flood mitigation work. So we are hoping that, we can build out new types of technologies that will manage more stormwater for less maintenance requirements. And here's some additional information. So these are links to show the specific types of practices that we've been constructing so far and the way we've been implementing them. And these are great resources if you want to see if anyone's interested in the stormwater management sector. And that's it.